Today's video is not particularly a happy one, so if you're looking for orchid blooms and roots galore, you may want to click away from this video right now. Just kidding. Stay tuned. All of this and more coming up at The Orchid Hut. Welcome back to The Orchid Hut. My name is Dana, and as I mentioned in the brief introduction, today's video is going to include a number of problems that my orchids are having. And the problems vary. Some are happening to orchids that I've been growing outside, and some are happening to orchids I have on the inside. And you know, whether you're more of a professional grower or a hobby grower like me, these are things that you can run into, and it's important to know, when you need to just kind of give up the ghost and, either treat the orchid or maybe get rid of the orchid. All of those skills are important, whether, you're a hobby grower or a professional grower. So we're going to start today with this particular orchid right here, which has been growing in my secondary grow space under the grow lights. It's, a Phalaenopsis type orchid, has been doing really well until all of a sudden I noticed something was happening to the leaves. These spots started out as yellow spots, and then they started to turn black. The pattern of the, problem is sort of very random. And, this is an orchid that I'm just simply not going to be able to save. I have no earthly idea why this happened, other than all of a sudden some sort of infection in the leaves, probably something bacterial, has taken over. And the moment I noticed this with this particular orchid, I separated it from the rest. If in the event it's something that could spread, I don't want it to spread to the other Phalaenopsis orchids that I have growing back there. And otherwise the plant was completely healthy, had a good root system until this started happening. So I have a trash can on the floor right beside me. I'm not dumping this on the kitchen floor. But here we go. We're just simply getting rid of this. I'm going to take the pot and I will sterilize it and then just put it back in my collection of pots to reuse at some point in the future. Okay, now at this point in the video, before we get to the lady slipper orchid that I have here, I want to show you some clips from my outdoor orchids. Now earlier in the year, you may have remembered a community post where I was very excited because my Repotting was developing a bloom spike. And I'm going to insert some video clips from outdoors here. Well, because we had been having an awful lot of rain, there were snails that were beginning to, crawl up onto the plants, and every day I was going out there and I was picking them off. And if you sort of understand my growing philosophy, you know that I don't like to use a lot of pesticides and sprays and chemicals and things like that on my orchids. I'm more of an inorganic kind of grower. So I would get the snails off as best I could. Well, one snail got to the bloom spike, as you can see in the little video clip here. And over time, that hole kind of developed a webbing in it, almost like there was a spider or some other insect that built a web in that hole that the snail had eaten into the bloom spike. And the entire bloom spike died back. So what I did is I cut it, and the tissue was very, very dry. I did put some cinnamon on it in any case. And, so a lost bloom spike. You have to just tell yourself, well, there's always next year. And hopefully now that I know that I can get a bloom spike to form, then maybe I can take a bit more precaution next year to keep that from happening again. The good news is that you can see some new roots coming up at the surface of the pot, which is a good thing because that's what Repotting orchids do. All right, there's one other orchid here in my outdoor collection that I want to show you something that happened. And I mentioned we've been getting a lot of rain, and I found that earlier in the summer I really wasn't even having to water my orchids all that much because the rain was keeping them plenty wet, and in maybe some cases too wet. And you can see on this particular Cattleya type orchid that the newest growth started getting some sort of black rot in the center of the stem. It became very bendy. And so after noticing that, I went ahead and I cut down into hopefully healthy tissue, put some cinnamon on it. And you know, I'm gonna really hope that somewhere along the rhizome, one of those other pseudobulbs will, you know, have a back bud on it so that new growth can continue to form for this plant. So fingers crossed this one will end up being okay. I took a look at the stem that I cut off and I didn't really see anything bad going on at the cut point. I didn't see any purple rings or, you know, any other blackness that would indicate that I did not get all of the infection or whatever gone. So fingers crossed that one will be okay. All right, I'm going to take a quick little break and then we're going to come back to the highlight of today's video, which is the mealy bugs on this lady slipper orchid. Okay, be right back. Okay, so at least I wore a happy shirt for you today. The flowers and the birds. One sort of happy story to go along with my shirt is that just yesterday we noticed the migratory hummingbirds coming back into the area. So we were able to fix our hummingbird feeders, and I'm not sure they're eating much though. They're so busy trying to chase each other away from the feeders. So those are actually kind of enjoyable to watch as they're passing through during migration. Okay, so back to the orchid. Now this is a Paphiopedilum. It's a hybrid. It's actually got quite a complicated name here. If it doesn't focus on the camera, I'll be sure to type it in when I'm editing the video. And this one was added to my collection, I'm thinking maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. And when I bought it, of course, I did not notice that it had any kind of mealy bug issue. And the good news is that I have not noticed that these mealy bugs have spread to any of my other orchids. As soon as I noticed this one having a problem, I began to treat it, and we'll talk about how I did that in just a little bit. And I separated it from the rest of my collection because these things will spread. I have never ever had mealy bugs in any of my orchids, so I know that this was introduced through this new purchase. And you know, you can't always exactly see that an orchid has that when you buy it. You know, you look, you try to inspect as best you can, but they can be, you know, hidden down in the crevices of the leaves, possibly, you know, on the stem, even underneath the soil, so, or the media. So, you know, you do the best you can, but sometimes these things happen. So let me start about 6 weeks ago. So it was about maybe 6-8 weeks ago that I noticed the mealy bugs on this particular plant. And it was most noticeable down in the center, you know, the crevices of the leaves, and down at the bottom of the stem close to the media. And my first line of defense was to take a cotton swab and use some alcohol just to touch the spots that I could see the kind of the white powdery mealy bug on there. So, you know, you can't just put alcohol over the entire plant. That's, you know, just not a good idea. So you just have to take a cotton swab and just touch the places where you actually see the mealy bug. And you do have to use about, I think, 71% alcohol, not the higher strength 91%, because that can be too strong. All right, so I did that and I waited a bit, and what I could tell was that it either didn't help or I didn't exactly get all of it, and so, you know, there was still an ongoing issue. Okay, so the alcohol, I don't think long term was going to be the way to go. So what I did a couple of days ago is I took some neem oil. And I do use neem oil on my orchids from time to time when I get desperate. And I sprayed this entire plant, the stem, down inside the leaves, top of the soil as best I could with the neem oil. And you know, put it kind of in a dark place for a couple of days, because if you leave it out in the light, the neem oil can cause the leaves to burn. And you know, I'm not certain if these mealy bugs that are still here are dead, alive, I don't know. But I'm going to try to get the camera to kind of focus in on this leaf right here, because you can actually see not just the white powdery stuff, but the true outline of the actual little mealy bug itself. And what they do is they basically just suck the fluids, the juices, out of the orchid leaves, and the plant begins to decline, and over time they will just take over the entire plant and the plant will succumb. So, you know, I don't know whether I did any good with the neem oil or not, but what I am going to do today is to try a third remedy and to actually repot this orchid. And I'm going to be using something called diatomaceous earth. And it's actually, it's composed of ground freshwater diatomaceous earth, fossil shell flour. And because of its very sharp nature, even though I think when we open the bag we're going to find out that it's very powdery, but I think it also has very, very sharp powdery components to it. And what this is supposed to do is basically destroy the bodies of these insects, sort of like with a razor blade type activity when they touch the diatomaceous earth. I know that sounds like pretty gruesome, but basically the little mealy bugs are cut to shreds by the diatomaceous earth. So I'm going to be repotting this. I'm going to wash this entire plant at the sink really, really well, try to get off as much of the mealy bugs as I can. And then when I repot this, I'm actually going to put some of this earth in the media so that in case there's any remaining mealy bugs under the surface, they'll crawl through that and they'll be destroyed. And then I'm going to mix some of this up in a sprayer and spray the top of this plant down into the crevices all really, really well, because it will leave a film of this on the plant. And as those mealy bugs crawl along the leaves, they will basically destroy themselves in theory. Okay, so that's how it's supposed to work. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break. I'm going to get myself set up here for a repot, and we will mix in some of this diatomaceous earth with the new media and then spray the plant. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, so let's see where this takes us. Let me explain what I have laid out here. So I opened the bag of diatomaceous earth, and as I suspected, it is an extremely fine powder, and I put a little bit in a cup so that I could mix it in with the media later. There were some warnings on the bag, so just be very cautious. You know, respiratory irritation, eye irritation if you breathe this dust in. So, you know, if you're sensitive to that, be extra cautious. And even if you're not, be extra cautious. And then I took about 2 heaping tablespoons and I mixed it up in this spray bottle with about, you know, half full of water and maybe 2 heaping tablespoons of the diatomaceous earth, and shook it up really, really well. And it kind of makes like a milky water, and you know, that's what I'll be spraying the plant with and the soil, top of the soil, when I'm finished with the repot. Okay, so we'll set that aside for a moment. I am going to be using, as usual, a Repot Me mix. This is made for Paff and Frag repots. It's called their Imperial Orchid Mix for Paff and Frag orchids. It's a little bit finer than, say, like a Phalaenopsis or even a Dendrobium, and certainly a Cattleya type mix, so it's a little bit finer because, you know, typically these types of orchids prefer a little bit more moisture retention. And so that's ready to go. New pot is ready to go. Clippers are ready to go. And let's see what's going on inside this pot. I did water this. Yesterday. So this is a dead root. I'm looking a little bit like in the media here just to see if I can see evidence. There's a creepy crawly bug, but to see if I can see evidence of the mealy bugs. And I see like some little white spots, but it's hard to tell if that's mealy bugs or something else. So I'm absolutely going to make sure that I throw all of this away and it doesn't come in contact with any of my other orchids. And these roots are actually still relatively solid, which is good news because this orchid is going to need all the help it can get to kind of get back on its feet. These mealy bugs have taken a toll. The leaves are beginning to wilt. This one is dead. And the overall plant is in noticeable decline. And this leaf right here is about to separate. And you can see where these mealy bugs love to hide. And when I did the initial alcohol treatment, almost impossible to get completely down in that crevice where that leaf was, and you can just see the pretty severe infestation down there. So now that that's exposed, I'll be able to wash that away and treat it. There's a lot of white powdery mealy bugs right there. There was no way alcohol was going to get to all of this. There's some in the center there where there was a previous bloom spike. Okay, so I am going to go to the sink and get this plant completely wet, wash away as much of this as possible, get this cleaned up, even kind of sterilized, and I'll be back with the repot. Okay, so now I have an orchid that probably feels like it's been through a car wash. I tried to rinse out as best I could in all of the leaf joints. I still see some evidence of mealy bugs in there that didn't get washed away. They're rather sticky. So now I think what I'm going to do, before I even repot this, and since I have this leaf joint open, I'm going to go ahead and spray some of the diatomaceous earth mixture in that leaf joint. And I am probably going to go leaf by leaf and do that exact same thing. Now the idea here is that when this dries, it's going to leave behind that diatomaceous earth that the mealy bugs find very sharp. And it is supposed to destroy the exoskeleton of the mealy bug. Alright. Again, there's a good bit right here that did not get washed away under the sink. I'm going to try to cut away as much of that as I can without damaging any of the living tissue. And then I'm going to give that a really good spray. And when I was at the sink, roots of a lady slipper orchid are different than like a Phalaenopsis. They have like little hair-like structures on there, but I could see that there were even tiny little mealy bugs beneath the surface clinging to the roots. So even the roots are going to get a spray. Alright, let me see what's going on here. This is almost like a new growth, but it's very, very fragile because the mealy bugs have taken their toll. Okay, messy work for sure. Alright, now the only other thing I can think is that it's probably a better idea to do this early in the day so that the orchid has a chance to dry. You know, typically we're not real fond of getting all this moisture down in the leaf joints, but in this case, you know, needed to do something. All right, so in my secondary grow space right now, I have a fan running, and I'll be placing this orchid in the room with the fan so that it will really have a chance to dry by nightfall. Alright, so now that I've got a little bit of media in the pot, I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle some of this. Try not to create too much dust when you do this. It does have a tendency to be very kind of powdery and sort of back up in your face, so handle it with caution. Alright, so that is looking pretty good. I'm going to sprinkle just a tiny bit more of this on the top. Okay. Now, a final spray. And I even washed the tag, you know, because there could have been a mealy bug on here, so I cleaned the tag really well. Okay, everybody needs to really cross their fingers for this particular orchid. I'll try to report back in a few weeks and see if this one has perked up a little bit, and hopefully there won't be any new signs of mealy bug activity. Okay, if you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button is coming up in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, and don't forget that notifications bell to let you know when I've posted something new. Thank you all so much for watching, and talk to you next time.